Welcome to this place this morning. We are an affirming ministry of the United Church of Canada, and as such, we intentionally seek to welcome all in this community. So we hope you feel the warmth of this place and the warmth of the people here. Our sign says, children welcome, noise expected, and we are particularly grateful to have the voices of many children in worship in our midst. There are also some folks around wearing blue ribbons. Those ribbons denote someone who is designated to answer questions. If you have any questions about the way we do things or our church or whatever, they would be happy to answer your questions. This morning's worship is a little bit of a departure from our usual worship, but we hope that it will engage you and inform your spirit. The participants from our most recent trip, Quest Mexico trip to Cuernavaca, are going to share worship leadership with me this morning, as well as our musicians, Aaron Temple and Betty Lou Agnew. And we have a special musical presentation by Vaden this morning, so we're really looking forward to that. I'm honored to be wearing a traditional Mexican poncho this morning that was gifted to me by a woman by the name of Gloria Cruz. This amazing person impacted us all in a very significant way, and you'll be hearing more about her later in the worship this morning. We've also brought some symbols of our experience that are gracing our communion table this morning, and we would be happy if you came up after worship and asked us questions about those, or we could tell you about where they came from. I light our Christ candle this morning, a visual symbol of the risen Christ, the light of compassion, the light of love, the light of hope. Thank be to God.
Please join me in the invitation to worship. This is a responsive reading. I'll read the light type and you can read the bold type. Around the globe, God's people gather today.
On this Sunday, we gather to worship a small part of the worldwide community of believers.
We speak the words in different languages.
Our understandings are different too.
Yet we are more the same than different. Across many time zones, let us worship in unity, peace, and joy.
We are blessed to be together, one people of God.
Please join me in our gathering prayer. Loving Creator, you touch our lives with mystery and hope. We come to this place today, ready to see your power working through us. Help us as we listen to the witness of the Quest Mexico participants today, to be open to your word and to answer your call among us. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Okay, the first reading is from Zechariah, chapter 7, verses 8 to 13. It's called The Message. There's nothing new to say on the subject. Don't you still have the message of the earlier prophets from the time when Jerusalem was still a thriving, bustling city and the outlying countryside, the Negev and the Shephelah, was populated? This is the message that God gave Zechariah. Well, the message hasn't changed. God of the angel armies said then and says now, treat one another justly, love your neighbors, be compassionate with each other. Don't take advantage of widows, orphans, visitors, and the poor. Don't plot and scheme against one another. That's evil. But did your ancestors listen? No, they set their jaws in defiance. They shut their ears. They steeled themselves against God's revelation and the spirit-filled sermons preached by the earlier prophets by order of the God of the angel armies. And God became angry, really angry, because he told them everything plainly, and they wouldn't listen to a word he said. Here ends the first reading.
And the second reading is from Matthew, chapter 25, verses 35 to 40. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of those who are members of my family, you did it to me.
So as we debriefed and pondered the questions around our experience in Mexico, I had to go off to school. So I asked the participants to answer 2 questions for themselves about the impact of this experience. And they created this. Take a look.
In February of 2017, a group of 8 people from St. Martin's United Church traveled to Cuernavaca, Mexico to participate in the Quest Mexico program. Each participant was asked how a specific part of the program impacted their faith.
I admit I was a doubter before going on this trip. What I mean is that I couldn't help but wonder if the money I was spending to get there could have been better spent to help the people there. But Keith kept telling me, just come, you'll see. So I went on faith. And I'm so glad I did. I soon realized that I wasn't there to help, but to be helped. Helped to understand. Not only did I not have the answers to anything, I didn't even know the questions. There was a quote by Lilla Watson on the wall in our meeting room that puts it beautifully. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together. One way I have changed since visiting Talamacazapa is that I complain less. When I start, I remind myself I didn't have to choose today between feeding my children or buying them uniforms so they could attend school. I have arsenic-free water to drink from multiple taps right inside my home. I have nothing to complain about.
When we first went to visit the people at La Station and got to meet 2 families, how I felt when I came out of there was that they're a wonderful, beautiful, and welcoming people that are so hopeful for their lives. And then we got to listen to Ross Gandy, and after listening to him, I don't know if I'd say that I lost my faith, but I lost my faith in humanity. So when we had Vespers that night, I couldn't bring myself to sing Deep in Our Hearts because I felt so much like we as a human race are not being deep in our hearts and helping people and not crushing them.
The market experience had a profound impact on me after walking rows upon rows of vendors, in which many of them had the same produce. I realized it was going to be very difficult to find out which one you would purchase from. Given a grocery list and 80 pesos a day, minus 16 for bus fare, we soon realized that our quantities on our list were unachievable. Many of our items were not bought or cut in half. For instance, milk at 28 pesos was not bought. The market was clean and produce fresh, which only added to the difficulty on which vendor to support, as you realize they were all in need.
So one of our service projects was painting at the LGBTQ Center. This is a small 2-room place, minimal furniture and a rather crude bathroom. It was called The Collective. Here at home we speak openly of Gay Pride Week, of LGBT community and concerns for transgender people. We have a publicly funded place called AIDS Saskatoon. In Mexico, people who are gay or transgender are very discreet. Many feel threatened and will not freely associate. They have been bullied, beaten, and abused by family or schoolmates. One young person told us his story of attempted suicide. There are a few people in the collective who are developing a curriculum to teach those who have stopped going to school or who have been refused access to education. In the face of their own adversity, they're still trying to help each other. In our discussion of the Quest experiences, we were asked if what we saw caused us to question our faith. Yes, it did alter my faith, not in God, but in my fellow humans. Racial and gender equality is seriously lacking there. Helping these folks just by being friendly and laughing with them, and we did laugh, and providing some paint, brushes, and elbow grease was like Jesus saying, "If you have done this to the least of these, my brethren, you have done this for me."
The visit to the Indigenous community was interesting. I grew up in a Indigenous community in BC, and I went to some of the traditional ceremonies there and stuff like that as a child, and that was just normal. And I was interested in the connections and the similarities in the communities, and how the governments, both the Canadian government and Mexican government, are treating the people that grew up on that land and whose ancestors grew up on that land far before we came here. Our ancestors came here. So I really have a better appreciation, I think, for the land and the history and the spirituality of the people. We got to go and participate in a I don't know what you call it, but it was basically a spiritual ceremony with Nacho and up in the hills, and it was interesting. He blew in the conch shell and it just echoes out there. It was an incredible experience. And then later we went up, a couple of us went up to a pyramid up atop another mountain there, and again that's a religious site, that's a spiritual site, and the view from up there, and you know, the sense of history of what must have gone on there.
For me, it's really difficult to think about the effect that a single event had for me during the trip to Mexico, because I found that each visit, each experience that we had built on the next, and so that the impact was more for the whole trip. But when I think about Ophelia, two things come to mind. First was her determination. Ophelia came from a small, rural, impoverished village in Mexico, a village where girls didn't go to school, and yet she was determined to learn to read. Her determination was so important that at 11 years of age, she was willing to travel hundreds of kilometers on her own to Mexico City to become a domestic worker. It was truly inspiring to listen to her story. And that determination showed throughout her whole life experience. The second thing that stuck with me were the people that she met and was involved with along the way. Whether it was the Jewish family that took her under her wing, the Red Bishop, or Ivan Illich. There were people there, single individual people who were willing to help her, to support her and encourage her on her journey. And from that, she blossomed and grew.
It's very difficult for me to condense the enormity of that day into a few minutes. We'd heard from Ross Gandy about the scope of poverty in Mexico. We'd watched a video about the School of America, and that's in the US, and it trains Latin American soldiers in interrogation and intimidation techniques. We had learned more about the depth of the government corruption and the exploitation of indigenous lands in order to protect the interests of foreign business in Mexico. That evening we heard from Gloria Cruz, who was a victim of this corruption. 3 of her immediate family members were killed by death squads. The thought that those soldiers may have been trained in the US and that that movement was sanctioned by the government and that Canadian business might have been behind some of that exploitation of the indigenous lands really hit home for me. I'm not sure that it affected my faith in God, but it certainly affected my faith in humanity.
Participants were also asked what they would do as their personal witness to this experience. How would they put their faith into action?
I have already done a small part. I couldn't leave Cuernavaca without bringing back some of the embroidery that the women at the center had done. We purchased those and have sold some of them and still have some more for sale. And I hope to continue on with that.
I continue to be interested in and read about reconciliation in Canada. I think that's a really big, important aspect of this. The one thing that really struck me as interesting that Nacho had to say in regards to the development there was that, you know, they've been asking the government for money to improve their water system. They don't have enough water. And then the government came in with a proposal to build fish farms. And so when they said, well, but we don't even have enough water and you're proposing we raise fish, and then they go back and say they're not interested in economic development. And I kind of wonder, because we don't hear that, I wonder how much of that is happening in Saskatchewan, in Canada, with the Aboriginal communities, the reserves. Or how much opportunity they're getting, how much offer of help they're getting from any of the level of governments. And so I really want to see that improved upon. I want to understand a bit more where that's happening, if that's happening. And again, to where I grew up in Bella Coola, I know that there was a proposal that had come in a number of years ago about building a quarry, mining out a whole mountain of rock. And the Aboriginal community said, when would it return to natural state? And then it goes, well, they're not interested in economic development.
I feel that I need to challenge those biases that many still have about minority groups, like the LGBTQ community, poor people, and those of different races and religions. And we need to demonstrate tolerance and compassion for others as Jesus did.
I've come to realize just how privileged we are to live in Canada and how privileged I am as an individual. I try to live into that privilege and recognize that it's there. I'm also trying to be aware of privilege within everything that I do in my life, and when I recognize and see it, to call it what it is. I've been very involved in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and in looking at reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And it's my goal to continue to work to bring about change and recognition of the needs and the changes that have to happen. I may be only one person, but I am one person, and one person can make a difference.
This experience made me realize how privileged and lucky we are that we don't have to squeak out a living at $6 a day for food, clothing, school supplies, etc. I'll never barter or dicker again or complain about the cost of such items in these underdeveloped countries again. I don't know how they keep such positive attitude day after day.
I wish I had a plan. I wish I had something and I could say, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to impact those people in a positive way. The problem is so big that it's very difficult for one person to be able to fix it. So I think what I've decided is that the best idea is that I can be a witness to that. I can teach people about what's going on. I can encourage them to go on this quest trip so they themselves can experience what we did. I think we need to be more conscientious about who we're voting for, who we're investing our money in. These are maybe ways that they're small, but it's a start.
This is a work in progress. It took a while on return for it to sink in that the world had not changed. I had. I pay closer attention to world news now. I tell people bits about the trip, trying not to overwhelm them. Going forward, I want to learn more about the Mission and Service Fund and possibly take on an M&S leadership role in St. Martin's. Stay tuned.
Thank you. As you can imagine, it's very difficult for us to express and to give you a taste of everything we experienced in a few minutes. But we would encourage you to ask the participants questions, to find out about some of the things that they talked about. As they continue to debrief and ponder this experience, they will continue, as I will continue, to come to new understandings about what it was that we experienced and what we can do about that. So I would encourage you to ask questions and to consider potentially going on one of these trips as a way of having a first-hand experience. Let us bless each other responsibly as we go from this place. Let us go out into the world remembering. Let us go out into the world to love, cherish, and nurture all whom we meet, all of God's creation. Let us go with God's blessings.
May grace, mercy, and peace be with us all, this day and forevermore.
Amen.